Welcome to Roots and Peaks. Today, we're going to talk about 3 hikes that nearly killed me. Keep in mind, I am a 42-year-old man who has a number of injuries under my belt, such as tearing my Achilles tendon twice. But I'm a very experienced hiker, and these hikes scared the living out of me. Weather systems forming. Also, stay tuned because before my number 1 most deadly hike, I'm going to give a list of 5 extremely difficult hikes in the White Mountains. That's right, all these hikes are in the northeast part of the United States, because that's where I live, but I would love to hike some scary trails outside of the Northeast, maybe further west in the United States, and certainly globally. So if you have any ideas for scary hikes, please leave them in the comments below. And while I'm begging for your attention, please hit the subscribe button. I've just recently reached 1,000 and my next goal is 1,500 subscribers, so please help me get there. Jumping right in, number 3, my 3rd most deadly hike, and get comfy, it's story time. This is the time that I did a loop hiking Mount Whiteface and Mount Passaconaway. Honestly, the loop hike up Mount Whiteface and over to Passaconaway and back down is not that difficult. There are some scrambles on Whiteface, but the reason that this hike was super terrifying to me and nearly left me dead has to do with the circumstances. You see, I left late that morning. I had to drop my kids off at school, and so I got an extremely late start. By the time I got to the parking lot, it was completely full. That meant that I had to park almost a mile away from the trailhead, walk down the road just to get back there. So I was starting really late. Also, it was a rainy, misty day in November, so it was a little cold, very damp, and I had never done this hike before. For anyone who knows, those are all recipes for disaster, but I was going to get my 48 4,000 footers done, and so I was going to do all these hikes. And I think that was a mistake, because I should have paused, said, man, it's kind of rainy, I'm not familiar, maybe I could just do a little bit and turn around. But no, I was going to go for it. The beginning of the hike was average, a little misty, a little wet, but I noticed that leaves had fallen and almost completely covered the trail, so it was really hard to see where I was going. The only way I was able to do that was by locating blazes or by checking my phone's GPS. Additionally, I didn't see a single soul until I got to Mount Whiteface. There I saw a mom and 2 kids, and I asked if they were going over to Passaconaway, and they said, oh no, it's gonna rain really hard, we're going down. And I thought to myself, okay, I think I can still make it over to Passaconaway. I don't want to have to come back here and then hike up Passaconaway, which is a wooded summit. So I decided that I would continue on. It was a mistake. Last thing that I did wrong was I was listening to a book the entire time, and it was a book about loneliness and about a town filled with ghosts. So that gave me a spooky mindset. When I got to the ledges of Mount Whiteface, it was a little slippery, but I felt really comfortable. I was down on my knees and sort of scrambling up. No big deal. But then, after I summited Mount Whiteface, I had a decision to make. I could either go on to Mount Passaconaway, or I could go down from there. And I decided to go on to Mount Passaconaway even though my body was telling me it was tired. That was another mistake. Can you see a theme here? All of these hikes are pretty much due to mistakes and errors that I made. So, continuing on to Mount Passaconaway, it started to rain. It started to rain quite hard. And if you've ever done the hike up Mount Passaconaway, it's not particularly difficult, but it is rather steep towards the end. And it was a little slippery, and I was tired. So I finally summited Mount Passaconaway and headed down, was slipping all down the rocks. No real big deal. But here's where my actual terror started. The sun set, and it became quite dark. Now I had a headlamp. thank goodness. But, like I said before, the trail was covered in leaves and I had never hiked this route before. So it was extremely difficult to navigate down. And the scariest moment for me was I lost the trail entirely, completely. And I was pretty freaked out. It's night, I don't know the trail. I felt panicked. Fortunately, I had two other ways to navigate. I had a paper map and a compass, but more importantly, I had a GPS tracking me. And so I could look down at the GPS. I had maps downloaded offline, and I could figure out how to get back onto the trail. Without that, though, I very easily could have been out in those woods for hours, days, or maybe until the end of my life. That's scary, and I nearly died, but what's number 2? My second scariest hike was actually on a backpacking trip. It was my first solo backpacking trip, and I decided to do a semi-Pemi, which is part of the Pemi-Loop. I wasn't going to do the whole thing, but I decided to go up a very hard section and camp out at a campsite called Whiteout. So once I got there, it was pretty early and I was feeling really good. And I decided that I would go further, set up my campsite, go further, and then come back. But I made a very big mistake that was super scary and could have caused my death. You see, about 5 miles into the hike, I realized that I had left my water filter in the car. What I did have as a backup, otherwise I would have turned around, was I had tablets. Now, if anybody has ever used water purification tablets, they're a bit tricky. You have to use them and wait for 30 minutes before you can drink water. I purified 2 32-ounce bottles and left one in camp and brought one with me. Now, I still needed to eat that night, so I thought leaving that 32-ounce bottle at camp was smarter. I would cut down on weight, and I would just do kind of a fast pack hike. Unfortunately, as I walked along the ridge and got to South Twin, I realized I was gonna run out of water. Again, stupid. Instead of turning around there or asking for help from one of the other hikers, I was so close to North Twin. And so I decided that I'd just go to North Twin and I'd come back. It's mostly downhill from there. No big deal. By the time I got to North Twin Peak, which, by the way, not worth the extra effort, and I had already done it before, so I didn't even need it for a list, I was completely out of water. That means I had to backtrack many miles to the camp without any water at all. And I have never felt so thirsty in my life. It was getting dark, so I had my headlamp on, the sun was going down. It was probably almost 9 at night at that point. I hadn't eaten dinner. All of that was back at the campsite. So I was really scared and worried that I couldn't make it. Fortunately, that was not the case. I made it back, but it was a terrifying lesson that I learned that day, which is always make sure you have enough water, know exactly where your water sources are, and make sure there's at least someone around, because by the time I got back to that campsite, there was no one on the trails anymore. It was way too late. Okay, here's the quick bonus content. The top 5 hardest trails in New Hampshire, according to me. Number 5 is the Flume Slide Trail. Notoriously steep and sketchy. Number 4 is the 6 Husband Trails up Jefferson. It's long, it's steep, it's treacherous. Number 3 is the North Slide going up the Tri-Pyramids. It'll take your breath away. Number 2 is ascending Mount Adams via Kings Ravine, especially if you go through the subways. And the number 1 hardest trail in New England, almost everyone agrees, is Huntington's Ravine. Do not descend Huntington's Ravine, only ascend Huntington's Ravine. And make sure you do it on a dry day. Or better yet, skip it. Woo! So my most frightening hike, the one that nearly killed me the most. That's Statement makes sense. It was on a relatively unsuspecting mountain. Many of you may have climbed it. It was on Mt Mookilauke. Some people say Moosilauke, I say Moosilauke. Fight me in the comments, bro. I've hiked Moosilauke twice, and both times I hiked it in winter, which turns out not the greatest idea in terms of safety. But the first time I hiked Moosilauke was truly, truly terrifying. I ascended via Beaver Brook Trail, and that is notoriously a steep trail anyway. But in winter, it's additionally difficult. You have to have the right equipment. Fortunately, I was with my wife. We both had the right equipment for the trip. We both knew that it was a bit stormy on the top, but it wasn't supposed to be crazy. So we thought, okay, we can do this. We were absolutely fine, maybe a little tired, but fine until we got to the summit. And if you know Mt Mookilauke, the whole top is open. And if you come up the Beaver Brook Trail, you have to go an extremely long distance to get to the actual summit. And it's not very much elevation gain or loss. It's just a big open field, essentially, on top of a mountain. What that means is you get wind whipping across there in a bad weather day. And we just happened to be there on one of the worst bad weather days I have ever seen. The snow was whipping around so much that we certainly should have turned around and gone back down. But hindsight is 2020, and we decided that we would push on. We could see cairns, we could see each other, but it was so loud that unless we were within a foot of each other screaming, we couldn't hear each other. The first scary thing that happened was my wife got ahead of me, and I could not flag her down to say slow down. And she did not turn around to look because she was deathly focused on the cairn in front of her. So that meant that I was rushing to try to reach her. It's a bad situation for anyone. Slow down, think if you find yourself in a position like that. Fortunately, I did not rush too much and get hurt, but the second scary thing that happened was about halfway in to our trek across the top of the mountain. It was so much wind and snow that you could not even see the next cairn. So you had to guess where you thought it was or look at your GPS. But it was so cold and icy that you couldn't take your gloves off. You had to be fully masked. I eventually lost sight of my wife. She was too far away, could not shout, but she seemed to be going in the right direction. And we eventually made it to the top. And it was incredibly scary. We must have hit it just at the right time where it was almost whiteout conditions. I don't know how fast the wind was blowing, but my guess would be 70 or 80 miles an hour. And up at the top, we did meet a man who had planned on skiing down Moosilauke. He wisely decided that the conditions were too rough and he was going back down the easier side of that mountain. So we waited for just a few minutes. The storm passed a little bit, wasn't quite as white out, and we knew where we were going. We stayed together. We made our way back to Beaver Brook Trail and into the trees, and we were safe. But that was honestly the most scared I've ever been on any hike. And I've hiked a lot in winter. But that storm really snuck up on us, and we made a very bad decision not staying at treeline and turning around. So I will never do that again. I now know better. Fortunately, that did not take my life or my wife's life. Yep, absolutely terrifying. I am really glad that we made it back safely that time, and all three of these hikes, I'm super glad that I made it back safe and sound, and I've learned from each one. So if this ever happens to you, make sure that you learn from any of those really difficult hikes. Are there any hikes that you've done that were really scary, almost caused death, or hikes that are so hard that you just couldn't recommend them to a friend? Put them in the comments below. Again, subscribe if you would, help me get to 1,500. Like the video, dislike the video, interact, and let me know if there's anything that you'd like to see from this channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.